Before becoming a taxi driver, one of the requirements is to do the knowledge of London. This involved knowing most of the streets and the places of interest within a 6-mile radius of Charing Cross, which is in the centre of London, just there. Goes to roughly Brockwell Park in the south, Canary Wharf in the east. You never knew where each day was going to lead. Every day was very different. But one thing you did notice was the levels of air pollution and what I was breathing in whilst I was driving.
I love living in London, but as a doctor I do get worried about how polluted the air is around us.
Health warnings for the most vulnerable were issued in several regions, from Yorkshire in the north to the southeast of England.
When I started driving in the early 90s, that if you're in the middle of the road, you're exposed to the worst air pollution. You could see it. Kieran was at home. He was suddenly woke up in the night, really struggling to breathe. That happened on quite a few occasions.
I remember my mum telling me I was basically crawling around on my hands and knees. Next moment I just flipped onto my back and basically just stopped breathing. There's only so much you can do.
Both of my sons have had asthma, quite badly. Kieran had asthma a lot worse than Edward. When they moved out of London, you know, went on a holiday or went to visit friends, it was noticeable how they didn't have the same asthma effects. It's about an hour's journey into college on my bike. It's about sort of 12, 13 kilometres, depending on which route I take. And then it's normally, I would think about how, you know, to cycle ahead and look at the weather and see what I need to wear. It's always so changeable. So it's always a balance between not being cold in the morning and then not being too hot on the way home. One of the things my research can do is actually play a part in stopping anybody dying in future of air pollution.
Beautiful, you can take a photo of me.
Ella Kissy Deborah was just 9 years old when she died following a severe asthma attack. She lived just metres from the South Circular in Lewisham, one of London's busiest roads. Up to 36,000 people die from air pollution each year, but the UK's current particulates limits are double the World Health Organisation's recommended levels. Ella's mother, Rosamond, is pressing the government to take urgent action.
She was someone who was particularly vulnerable to air pollution. And this is a quote from her mother, Rosamond: "Happy, playful child growing up in southeast London with a lust for life. A few weeks after her 9th birthday, she suffered a fatal asthma attack. She's the first person in the world."
One of the projects that I'm involved in today is looking at homes with children with asthma, looking at the air pollution within the homes. And I think it's something that every one of them deaths is something that could have been avoided.
Wellhome was a big study. There are lots and lots of investigators, ranging from toxicologists through to psychologists and behavioural scientists. We needed to go into over 100 homes around London and install equipment. Mike has been helping with installing that equipment, configuring it, gathering the data, and it is a huge amount of data.
So this is our aerosol science lab, and this is really where we bring instruments, where we put them together, where we test them before we put them out into the field. And each of the homes in the Wellhome project had at least one child with asthma. So there's a whole range of instruments that we take into the homes that's measuring air pollution to get a full account as possible of what's happening in the homes and what's causing the air pollution within the homes. For instance, like cooking, how often people cook, what type of cooking they do, and then looking at how, whether they have their windows open, what sort of ventilation in the homes. And I think, you know, they're very engaged in wanting to learn more, to find out how they can improve their own environment for their children.
Growing up, he's suffered from breathing problems since. He's never told this to me directly, but he has a big scar on his chest like here. I can't remember if he got that when he was an adult or when he was a kid. Again, there's nothing he's really shared with me or opened up to me about. But I can only imagine from his perspective, he's like, okay, so I've had breathing problems. Both my sons have had breathing problems. There's, you know, thousands of other people facing breathing problems. What can I do to make this better? That sounds to me the sort of the Mike that I know.
We'll recommend the adoption of this protocol to the conference by unanimity.
The Kyoto Climate Change Conference was very much in the news, it was in the newspapers, it was on the television. Think local, act global was the slogan that came out of it, and I think it was quite a big moment for me. And that was when I went to get a degree in environmental management at the Imperial College. My dissertation was on looking at how fast ice melts. It was in a national park in France.
This small glacier that is disintegrating, that is vanishing, makes it even much clearer that something fast is going on and the changes are really accelerating.
Since 2008, this glacier has retreated more than 1.5 kilometres up this alpine valley, one of the fastest rates ever recorded.
And the evidence was all around where it was happening. And you know, it really sparked an interest in that we don't have to just sit by and let these things happen. I just looked at a snowpack in the Alps, but it was representative very much of what's happening all around the planet. In the year 2000, London got its first mayor, and that was Ken Livingstone, who was elected. And he brought in the congestion charge as one of the first things that he did, which immediately removed a lot of vehicles off of the roads in central London.
That's right, but it's got to apply to everyone. Normally they seem to pick us out though. Okay?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. They should check the emissions in all cars, especially buses. They're the main culprits.
Obviously, drivers were worried because they bought their taxis, they've spent a lot of money on those taxis, and then to suddenly be told that they need to change, they need to maybe find alternatives, you know, it's quite frightening because people don't have that level of money to just go and buy a new vehicle. I was elected to represent our union members, taxi drivers, in discussions with the mayor to look at how we could clean the air. And that really was the first time that I really become involved in terms of trying to actually play a part in cleaning London's air.
And this really demonstrated to me for the first time a direct link between what you breathe and your health, a direct link between the two.
Initially, when I first met Mike, he was a taxi driver, but he was also, importantly, one of the participants in one of our studies. There was a time in London where taxis were seen as being a major source of pollution, and indeed when there were primarily diesel vehicles, there was a problem with diesel emissions. So when we started to approach taxi drivers, we didn't want to get to the situation where they thought that we were trying to shut them down or generate evidence that would really affect their trade. So it was quite cautious, quite a two-way conversation. And Mike stood out because he was a facilitator, where he had a voice. And this voice, in support of our study, was extremely useful to make sure that the taxi drivers understood why we were doing the research and ultimately agreed to be on our side and collaborate with us.
And then we've also got other instruments that we're looking at here, so that we can sort of, sometimes we're doing experiments in the lab, other times we're calibrating the instruments within the lab that then we take outside.
So when I first met Mike, it was another participant, one of many hundreds that I've met in the past, but he obviously showed a lot of interest in the subject area, and he was asking questions that weren't just about what do I have to do, they were more about why are you doing this and what do you expect to see. But he was also giving me information of why he thought this study was important. He had an inquisitive mind, but importantly, he really saw the value of research and the impact that research can have on the general population, or even in his case, with his colleagues that he'd worked with for many decades.
You can see them going up and down depending on the different environments we're in. We're in our aerosol lab today, so there's very little pollution within our lab. You can see the numbers are quite low. If we go outside, they will go up, but not a lot because, you know, the air around White City is fairly clean. So they would probably go up to sort of 12 or 14, and if we went in a more exposed, busier road, you know, we'd get up to maybe 20, 25. Then if we took it on the underground, it would actually go up a lot more than that, probably be in the hundreds. One of the good things for this, particularly we've given it to drivers, is you can see the numbers changing, and they can see as they drive around different environments and different roads, how the numbers are changing.
This is the TX E-City, London's electric cab, out today picking up fares for the first time.
This cab is helping me do my job in as much as it's so much easier and nicer and pleasant to drive. The old diesel cabs, they've served the trade quite well, but very antiquated, unreliable, uncomfortable, extremely expensive to run. So hot inside, it's unbelievable. You can actually near enough taste the fumes some days. This is a complete opposite.
We negotiated a compensation for taxi drivers so that they were able to bring their taxis up to the standard required that actually cut a lot of pollution and made a big difference.
So what we're doing in London is a range of measures. On April the 8th begins the world's first ultra-low emission zone, and that will mean if you choose to drive in a polluting vehicle to central London, you've got to pay an additional charge.
From there, Ken Livingstone and consecutive mayors have all brought in new policies to try to improve on that and actually make taxis a lot cleaner. And now we have a majority of electric taxis.
I believe it must have been back in 2019 that they were finally able to introduce the electric cab for the first time. And I remember him coming back with a massive smile on his face, extremely excited to show me the new electric cab.
So those inside voices, such as Mike's, I think made a big difference for persuading the industry that electrification was a good thing, not just for the environment, but also for the taxi drivers themselves in terms of their own health, but also financial benefits and sustainability, etc.
I saw a poster that was advertising for a master's course that Ben was involved in, that Environmental Research Group was running in King's College, looking at global air pollution and health. I've had a degree previously, and so I thought that'd be a really good thing to do because it sort of struck a chord that it was something I was really interested in.
When Mike expressed an interest about this MSc, because he'd seen students going through the course while he was being a participant in our study, it was an opportunity to have a bit more diversity in the cohort of students, have a different viewpoint.
I've never thought about doing a master's course before that, but then I spoke to Ben and he said, you know, apply for it, it'd be really good.
In public health research in particular, lived experience is extremely important. It dictates how you engage with the subject area, what you understand, how it's relevant to your own life, and then ultimately how you react to that. And taxi drivers, amongst other professions, have got a very strong lived experience.
As part of that master's, my research, my dissertation was about taxi drivers' exposure to black carbon. This was a diesel vehicle of a friend of mine, and we also used my electric taxi. And then we ran a series of experiments where we had a sort of a crash test dummy that was equipped with various devices to measure different pollutants within the taxi. So when we had a very diesel polluting vehicle in front of us, the protection to the driver was so much better. It was really showed how much difference the electric taxi, how much better the electric taxi was for the driver. And I think that really showed how the design of vehicles, how drivers using different ventilation settings can really protect them from the worst excesses of air pollution on the road. It was very different because I'd been working. I hadn't been a student for quite a long time. Ben was my personal tutor, and and he was always someone who was, be able to point me in the right direction. And Ben really encouraged me to do was to apply to do a PhD, and Dr. David Green had a project that he wanted somebody to work on within the London Underground.
Just about when Mike was starting his, let's call it, alternative career in the university, there was interesting times in London and air quality. Awareness was much greater. We also had a series of large pollution episodes coming through the UK, particularly affecting London, which produced a lot of media attention. So this is really quite a high-profile period of air quality and awareness.
I received a studentship from the Medical Research Council, so Imperial College and King's College.
I was fortunate enough, I guess, to be on Mike's interview panel when he interviewed for a PhD studentship, and there were a number of others of us on that panel. For that particular occasion I had to keep quiet because I knew Mike, he was part of our team, so I took no direct part in the interview itself, but I was able to observe the other interviewers. And I think their first thought when Mike walked in was, this student looks a bit different to the ones we normally see. And I watched them be completely won over by him. It was quite a special experience for me because I was an observer for that short period of time. And as Mike spoke and as they asked him questions and they learned about his knowledge and the way he answered those questions, you could see them being won round. And sure enough, when he walked out and we came as a panel to decide on who we were going to fund for that studentship, they immediately brought up his name as being a very, very strong contender.
Yeah, the London Underground is much more polluted than the air around us above ground. It's probably about 30 times more polluted. But that's because a lot of the time the pollution can't escape from the underground, unlike the air around us that's blown away by the wind. And one of the things that I think I want to show is just that how polluted it is, what's causing the pollution, what are the places with the worst pollution within the underground, and how we can make a difference and start to clean it up. From Willesden Junction to Elephant and Castle, and this was a typical journey. You can see where the PM2.5 concentrations got up to 400 micrograms per metre cubed, which is incredibly high when you think that outside environment is normally about 10 micrograms per metre cubed. So you can see it's up to 40 times higher in the London Underground. And one of the things that I did to measure this was to build a trolley, which I called Morse, to take onto the London Underground to contain all the equipment. It was battery powered. After COVID, it was still mandatory to wear a mask on the London Underground, and so I had to add a mannequin head which had a mask on to mimic the exposure that passengers would have when they're wearing a mask. And interestingly, this showed that if you wear a mask on the Bakerloo line on the Underground, then it reduces the exposure by up to 30%, which is a massive reduction in the amount of PM2.5 that you would be breathing during the journey. So that was quite a significant finding. One of the things that I found with my research is that as we go deeper in the tunnels of the London Underground, then we get more pollution. You know, one of the places I've been working quite a lot is at Hampstead Tube Station. That's the deepest platform in the London Underground network. The research I've done has shown that there's not been a lot of difference in the last 20 years to the levels of air pollution within that station. What we've got to try to do is find ways to try to reduce that pollution all over the network and maybe start at places where we can make a difference first of all. A lot of the pollution comes from the trains or the track or from the wheels of the train, so there's not much we can do about that. Probably the best way to reduce air pollution in the London Underground is by ventilation. You know, we haven't got any sort of forced ventilation within the Underground. That's a good way to reduce air pollution. I mean, we've seen with the Elizabeth line, you know, that's a much cleaner line with the, you know, with platform screen doors, with air conditioning in the trains, you know, and I think that's something to aim at. But when we look at the cost, it's massive. So it's a very long-term project to clean the London Underground. So if we want to reduce the immediate impact of air pollution, you know, one way to do it as an individual is to wear a mask to actually reduce that exposure.
And it is an important study. It's never been done anywhere in the world, and Mike had a really significant component to contribute. And as is common with these studies, the analysis and the reports and the publications take time to come through. It's surprisingly slow, so I expect the impact of Mike's work and the associated project to keep being generated for the next few years. Mike is one part of a jigsaw. We're all one part of a jigsaw, and you make that picture by joining together, and that's what makes a difference.
So this is a picture of myself and my partner Jane. This was in Cuba. Again, this is a picture of myself and Jane. This is on the Malecon, again in Cuba. We have a lot of pictures from Cuba because it was quite a significant place for us. It was where we met. When I was doing my PhD, you know, it takes a lot of time, and you know, you'd have to work quite late, work at weekends to get it done, which was very onerous on my partner Jane, and it does take up a lot of patience and a will to actually allow me to do that. But she was really good about it, and you know, I couldn't have asked for anyone better and more supportive, and you know, I'm really grateful for everything she did in supporting me. The eldest son is Edward. This is when he was very young. He's 35 now, but this was a picture that we took in the French Alps. And my other son is Kieran in here. He's now 30 years old. This was a picture when we was at a friend's birthday party. It was a fancy dress party. He looks very smart. He don't always look that smart, but generally looks quite good. So that's my family, you know, where we try to see each other as much as possible, my sons, and you know, obviously I see my partner every day. Thanks.